Hello all, welcome to a special edition of the 5-5 preview video. This is going to round up all of the sustainability reading strategies that we've used thus far. Just like in Module 1, we kind of broke things down into fall, recovery, and pastoral, and those types of ways of reading ecological. I want to do the same for sustainability to show you what we've done so far, and these will all be reading strategies that you can choose from when you're reading anything for your final exam, including the novel we normally read is The Water Knife, right? So I just remind you that these strategies can be used to read literature for a course like this, but really the big picture after this course ends, your life goes on, and the world still goes on. And so there's the real life, journalism, social media, public government, corporate reports. You can use these strategies to see, well, what are they saying? What are they not saying about being sustainable? What are they emphasizing? What are they not emphasizing? How are they making their argument about their place in a sustainable world, whoever they is, corporates, the government, you, how to live better, whatever it might be. So let's get right started. Just remember that a lot of these, the way we encountered them, were sort of the negative things that are going wrong. So we've always got to remember to turn these into ways for looking what is going right as well. First thing we have, Module 2.1, sustainability and the natural, defining things as natural, sometimes defining people as natural, right? So here's a list of ideas to work from. Our society operates through powerful binaries and narratives that oftentimes term minority groups either by gender, race, sometimes social class, sexual orientation, and elsewise, more natural than others. Remember, this often denies them access to claims of saying rationality, logic, being civilized, the values that construct the modern world. And so they're stereotyped as being closer to the earth, which seems good, but actually what it does is it works against them. They tend to be seen as naive, uneducated, misinformed, and capable. And so these natural people are often, we noted, brown-skinned, indigenous people, women, homosexual, working class laborers could be as well. So many things that are the losing groups and oftentimes suffer from environmental racism, have more environmental problems dropped into their communities. And the way they're represented just in pop culture can also be problematic as well, as remember from the end of the 2.1 reading. This disempowerment results in environmental racism, right? And so we can see communities like Flint, Michigan that have unhealthy water. We can see the water pirating that we saw in Mexico and all over the world from corporations. Flint happened because of the Michigan government. A lack of protection from government, victimization by corporations, many more things, right? When looking for environmental or sustainability issues, one might look at how a particular minority keeps having the same types of environmental problems or just more. And this is better than just looking for corporations and thinking that, oh, they're polluters, they're the bad guys. That's too simple sometimes. So another way of reading something is to look at how a particular group keeps getting saddled with particular environmental problems. We might look at women and say, okay, so what types of problems do single mothers have in areas where there's a high percentage of single mothers? Are they also not getting funding for public parks, for less breathable air, for schools that are updated and safe for the children? These types of things, right? Areas of poverty. Are there less food choices? We didn't talk about food much in the course, but this can be a problem. How much healthy food is available? How many fruits and vegetables are available locally? Or can you only shop at the corner gas station, right? In areas where there are lots of women or single mothers or something like this. We could transfer this type of thinking to African Americans as well. Remember, we learned they have higher degrees of lead concentration just from the communities that they live in, right? We could look at something like Cancer Alley, a real place in Louisiana that runs through a series of poor communities, and it is some of the most toxic chemical companies in the United States, all right in a row. And so these communities are poor and keep receiving these companies with their toxic chemicals, and the government doesn't protect them much, and they kind of need the jobs in these communities, so they keep saying yes, but they're basically being picked on because of their poverty. We could look again at food issues and food deserts, meaning there's not a grocery store within easy reach of you, within usually 1 square mile or more. So it's hard to get fruits, veggies, meat, and healthy things for your family, for your kids. Turns out there's a lot more food deserts in areas of poverty, and especially in cities, but it can be in rural areas too. Which leads to obesity, which leads to type 2 diabetes, leads to all kinds of problems. And there's a lot more food deserts in African American communities as well. So that is a form of environmental racism too. Native Americans, we can think of pop culture things. Lands taken for the oil pipeline recently. It didn't run through a white suburb, which it was supposed to originally in the Dakotas. Instead, it was to be routed through Native American lands because they have less political power. Native Americans have more toxic waste dumps on their lands in the U.S. than other places. They have more toxic mining sites. They have poor water and sanitation infrastructure. These are all real problems that Native Americans have on their reservations, right? So instead of just too easily saying, okay, the problem is that there's some villainous polluting company and it's happening everywhere or it's just in one specific location, instead we look at how one group keeps suffering the same type of problems and we say, okay, it's not just one villain. Rather, this seems to be something built into our political system, to the unequal power distribution, the income equality in our society, if we're looking at the United States or the developed world versus the less developed world. But there's some type of problem built into the hierarchy of society that these same groups, regardless of where they live, keep having the same problems. And so that becomes a sustainability issue in that it's connected to social justice, right? So you've got all this going on. What might this look like in literature? We could look at, say, if we looked at the water knife, this would be a really interesting thing to look for in the water knife when you read it. You have Arizona, Nevada, and California as the major states in there. It seems that Arizona oftentimes keeps on losing to California and Nevada. And so they would be the group that is getting picked on, the region getting picked on, people from Arizona. Turns out that Texas too sort of had a breakdown and there's a lot of refugees. So you could look at the types of things that the government did or did not do, or the corporations did or did not do to Arizona or to Texas. And you would look at how those regions were not supported by government or were pirated by corporations or something like this. And that would give you this type of reading. It wouldn't be based in gender or race, but in the water knife, it's probably the region that you live in because it's sort of state against state in the water knife. The government has broken down a lot, and it's sort of every state for themselves, so to speak. And so that'd be a way to use these as a reading strategy for the water knife. Number 4, arguing that anything is natural makes it seem original or only the preferred way or the long-term way, and this kills conversation, criticism, and other ideas. You might look for this in the water knife. We saw this prevalently in 2.1. And the review for that, I actually took you through what this looks like in real life for the anti-vax and some of the other things that are out there in the world and arguing that certain things are natural. And it's a way to win an argument, even though it doesn't mean it is more natural. It just means you're using that framework to try to win your argument, right, and persuade people. So the second area we looked at, economic and social systems that privilege developed nations. I've talked a lot about this, so I'll move through this one fast so we can get through the whole script here. But we might look at this everywhere we go in life, of course, but we might look at this in the water knife or in some of the other things we've looked at. If we think of a small place, if we think of Coca-Cola or El Returno, they all dealt with cultures and locations, places, usually small towns or developing countries that were getting picked on, right? We're getting pirated in some way, or having their culture replaced, or having their resources stolen, sometimes by government or sometimes by corporations. And the big thing to remember here, I'll let you read through this, is that basically when a developing country, a less developed country, comes into the economic system or some sort of economic partnership with a strong developed country, the United States or England or Europe or something like this, then usually what happens is the trade and the economic system favors the better, stronger company, not the better, sorry, the stronger, more developed country. And the people that are in the developing country who need the help might not always get what they need. They lose. Maybe their life gets a little better, but things are unequally distributed. Oftentimes, as we saw in, say, Small Place, it's the already wealthy or educated elite that seem to get most of the benefits of this economic back and forth, right? So the free market doesn't help everyone. It seems to help some people in a very unequal way. It's unequal in that it mainly helps the developed nation, and it's unequal that it helps the wealthy that are already in the developing country, or the politicians. But the poor, especially in the underdeveloped countries, tend to stay pretty poor. We saw that in El Returno. We saw people in Mexico not being able to fight back and losing their water. So we've seen this type of idea over and over and over in our course. Um, Here's another one that comes out of Dear at Providentia that's related that I put in here. Western culture and developed nations have the privilege of being distant enough from environmental problems because we offload them to other countries or to certain areas in our own country where there's a lot of poverty. And also we have the privilege of being far enough from our basic food sources, the killing of sources of animals, say deer, for food, that we can ignore problems, ecological problems. We're kind of distant from our ecology and from this idea that we have to eat things, right? Because we have industrial factories, which we read about in the pollen essay, that do all these things. We don't have to see it. Our food just shows up at the store and on our table, or we call and order a pizza or something. So we're really far away from the ecosystems. And that's a certain privilege to be that far away from it, to not have to deal with finding food, with how deal with how we're making food, how food is made, or deal with the environmental problems connected to that. This would be a good thing to look at if you wanted to use the pollen reading, the Michael Pollan reading on industrial food, for the final exam. We didn't get much of a chance to talk about it in the videos, but this would be a huge thing to look for and would connect pollen with Dear at Providentia, right? How we're distant from this and it's a privilege in some way. And of course can also undermine our health in many ways. So now we can move into what Diamond talked about. I talked about this in detail in the video, so we'll just kind of move through this one quick so I can say a few things about things that are later on this list. But remember, these are the signs that are often ignored. One thing you want to look for if you're using this for the water knife or any novel that ends the course is problematic cultural attitudes, that leaders are more interested in power and maintaining their privilege than in solving society's problems. It's hard to recognize a slow trend. It's a very human thing. We can't see things changing around us, but that is exacerbated by the fact that we have short-term interest, usually economic or based in power, maintaining power, or privilege, or staying rich and not becoming poor, or something like this. And that may clash with long-term good for all, long-term sharing of power, or taking care of minorities and the marginalized and things like this, right? And don't forget that some pro-environmental or sustainable changes might clash with our own values, our ease, our nice consumer lives, our nice comfortable lives that we have when we go home, right? And so for this reason, we don't want to change, right? And that includes me and you, certainly. Those in power do not perceive or resolve the crisis. So we could look for this in Water Knife. What were the early warning signs that were ignored? Or how do those who have power in the Water Knife, there's a lot of politicians in there and people that could change things. How do they not do that? How are they interested in short-term power and money, right? Power and money, so that they don't do anything about the problems in the Water Knife, and instead they make poor decisions or poor solutions or do nothing at all. And so we could definitely use all of this as a way of reading the Water Knife. We have enough background on the water problems in the Water Knife and enough going on throughout the book that we could look for these things, certainly. Here are other things that come out of Diamond. That we have to balance the environment against human needs, but that's not true. We can trust in technology to solve our problems. You could look again for this in the Water Knife. It's common in the real world. We talked about this throughout the second module. We could look at any environmentalists in the Water Knife and see how they're portrayed as people that are just drumming up fear and are out of touch and they're extreme, rather than just concerned people that understand sustainability and eco-balance. Big picture, environmentally stressed areas are hotspots for collapsed government, for inequality, for aggression and war and these type of things. And you're going to see this. This is the world of the Water Knife, which is why I picked it, because it fits really well with all of our ways of reading for sustainability. All right, we can look at water as a human right. We're running low on time, so here's a nice list of things that you're familiar with. But is the resource a human right, or is it kind of publicly protected like water in the US, even though it turns out we don't really know what we would do if there were a shortage of water? Or is it a commodity, something bought and sold? Then you can get into like, should it be priced so that all can afford it? Can those that are poor be priced out of having too little? Those that are rich afford to waste it? What about human rights versus industrial use? Who's going to protect and enforce these human rights, if it even is a human right? The government or international agencies? Who's going to stop the pirating? What about problems between corporations and governments when they work together to take care of themselves, but not people who actually need the water or the good? So since we're reading the Water Knife, most likely, you can be looking at all of these strategies as a way to comment on the water knife and sustainability, mainly about the breakdown of government or the treating of something that could be a human right as a good instead. More lists linked to human rights in the 21st century and to some other ideas that made an appearance in our course. Thank you.